we are here to participate in a seminar titled Late Career Session, Preparing Myself for a Career After My Degree. And the aims of this session are to encourage participants to think about where they intend to work or contribute to the community following their degree. Second aim is to identify the knowledge, skills and attitudes which they have developed and throughout their degree that will position them well for their future. And then before we start, allow me to introduce our honorable speaker to all of you. Okay, our speaker today is Professor Margaret Kiley. Professor Margaret Kiley is a visiting professor in the UPM School of Graduate Studies. Her research and teaching interests for almost 20 years have been in the area of research education, including the examination of doctoral theses, experiences of international students undertaking research degrees, candidates and supervisors' conceptions of research, and the introduction of coursework into the Australian PhD. Now, I would like to invite Prof. Margaret to begin this seminar.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a workshop, which means you do the work. So I think the first thing we're going to do is some work at this table. Can I ask, please, to stand? I think we need to move this table a little bit there so there's more room here. Is that sounding? So here's some work you can do. We'll just move just maybe about this much, just so that then we can fit some people, a bit more, not so crowded. So maybe in this way, a tiny bit. There. Oh yeah, like this. What is the purpose of a PhD? So there are many purposes. So for example, is one about learning to be an independent researcher? Is that what you're doing a PhD for? So you want to be an independent researcher, you love research, and that's what you really want to be able to do for the rest of your life. And you don't want anyone telling you how to do it because you want to do it independently. That might be one good reason. Another one is that you think you want to produce original research. You are absolutely passionate about, I don't know, fish in the ocean or birds in the trees or students in primary school or any other thing that you might be passionate about, and you want to contribute to our knowledge. That's a really good reason to do a PhD. Maybe one of your reasons for doing a PhD is that you think the PhD was going to educate you, train you, develop you, give you the skills to be an academic or a lecturer. If I use the word academic, I should be careful because that's the term we would always use in Australia. Please come in. An academic is someone who is a lecturer who both does research and teaching, okay, and also does service. So in the United States they'll call it faculty. You'll be a faculty member. In Australia, you might call it an academic. Here, you tend mostly to say to be a lecturer. But it means you don't just lecture, you also do research. Maybe that's the purpose of you doing a PhD. You wanted to be educated to be an academic. Maybe you did a PhD because you thought there'd be some other wonderful job for you that would be great if you had a PhD. That it might help you be a researcher in government or in a research institute, who knows, okay? Or something else. Okay, in your groups, and now we'll try and reorganise you two to be in a group. I think we might reorganise some tables. If you would like to join a group, because what I'm going to ask you, in your groups, I want you to spend 5 minutes between your group talking about what you think the purpose of doing a PhD or a master's was for you. Which of those is for you, or is it something completely different? Go. 5 minutes, I'm timing. Off you go. I've got my phone out to time. Okay, when you're finished, we'll come back together. So when I say let's come back together, finish what you're saying. Don't stop straight away. Don't go, and then I am up and stop. Finish what you're saying, because I will wait. I didn't wait for you because I was, so let's finish that and then we'll come. So if I say let's come back together, that means finish off quickly and then we'll come back. Okay, so let me just ask with this hands up. Who actually suggested that the main reason they are doing their PhD or Masters is to learn to be an independent researcher? Put up your hand. Okay, very small percent. Thank you. Who is doing their PhD so they can produce original research? Yeah, or independent researcher and original research, okay. Who did it because they want to be an academic and they thought doing a PhD is the way to learn to be an academic? Oh, lecturer, most, okay. Who did it because they want some other job and a PhD was going to be terrific in teaching them the other job? Oh, what was the other job? Not being a lecturer, to do what sort of work?
Oh, to actually do what I'm doing. Right now I do a lot of work with the community, so I thought that if I'm much better, then I can serve better.
Perfect, perfect. So I've done this a few times, this workshop, and just that every single person up until today has only said they wanted to be a lecturer. So it's very nice to have someone who wants to do something a little bit different. So who had something else, some other reason they wanted to do their PhD or Masters? Okay, that might be right. So who already has a job wherever they are from, whether they're Malaysia or somewhere, who already has a job? Okay, are you a lecturer?
I'm a researcher, not a lecturer at the university.
At the university, okay. You already got the university, I know. University. Okay, so for some of you, hello, have you got a seat? No, well, you can't stand for the whole talk, for the whole workshop.
Should we pick up one?
Yeah, let me go back. Thank you. Okay, so why is this important? Well, it depends what your purpose is as to how you get the best out of your PhD. So for you, if you are looking at being a better worker in the community, helping people in the community, you have slightly different aims during your PhD than someone who's already got a job as a lecturer, or someone who wants a job as a lecturer, or someone who doesn't care about a job, they just want to learn to do research. So this is a really important thing for you to be aware of about yourself. Okay. No, I don't want that to happen. No, thank you. No. Go away. I'll take you another day. Okay. So, before we go on though, I just thought, because I'm going to get on to what that means for you, I would just like to thank you very much. I would like to spend a few moments letting you know what's happening internationally. So first of all, those of you who are in Malaysia or who are hoping to get work in Malaysia, you are very lucky. Because at the moment, still in Malaysia, there are jobs for lecturers in universities. If you were looking at working in the United States, Europe, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and similar countries, I have to tell you some really bad news. And that is you would have a fairly small chance of getting a job as a lecturer. There's some chance, but very small. In Europe, 80% of PhD candidates want a job as a lecturer, and the data show that about 20% of them will end up with it. Okay? Same in Australia. Very similar in the United States. Why is this? Because in those countries, the universities have been established for a long time. They have staff like me who are older, not really old, but older. We've been there a long time and we don't plan to move for a while. So some young thing comes along, she wants my job. No, I'm not leaving. Go away, go and do something else, you see? And so this is happening throughout those countries. Which is why I'm saying in Malaysia at least, and I understand from talking to many of the other students the last 2 weeks, places like Iran, there are still jobs available as lecturers because the system is developing, is growing. Whereas the system in Australia, New Zealand, UK, USA, Europe is more like this. So these are really important things for you to have in your mind. If you're planning to go down to Australia and get a fantastic job as a lecturer, you might need to rethink. So it doesn't mean you won't get one. There's about a 28% chance that you could get one, but that's not very high compared with probably 100% or a 90% chance in Malaysia or somewhere similar. Okay. So the other thing that's really important though is in those countries that I was talking about. I know I'm in Malaysia and I should be talking about Malaysia, but I just want you, because like many of you are international, and doing a PhD gives you an international qualification. And one good thing about doing research is very international. So the thing that we need to think about is where else might you get work with your PhD? And in countries, not so much Australia yet, but growing, but in the United States, the United Kingdom and Europe, students with graduates with PhD are getting to be more and more attracted to industry. And I don't just mean heavy industry like engineering. Like all those people sitting there, we'll move you into a group in a moment as soon as we finish this, so thank you very much for being patient. What we'll do, what is happening is that in groups, like even in the public service, various industry groups, they are looking at employing students who know how to research. What an interesting idea. That you work in this public civil service or you work in an industry and you know how to research. Okay, so you might not get a job as an academic, but you might well get a job in industry. Again, that really influences your thinking about how you make the most of the last little bit of your PhD. So one last question to ask you, I've asked you a couple already. Who is within the last 6 months of their PhD? So you've only got 6 months and you're finished. Put up your hand if you're in the last 6 months. Okay. Is anyone in the last month or two? So, okay, this is for those at the end of their PhD. So where are you from? It's not the last 6 months. Where are you in your PhD?
First semester.
The first semester of a master's, okay, and you?
I'm in 7th semester of my PhD.
7, so you're near the end, yes, okay, you hope.
I hope.
You hope, okay. Where are you in your second semester? So I'm sorry about that because this workshop, there seems to be a little bit of a mix-up, was delivered very much aimed at students towards the end, so I will just have to change it as we go. And then just make it a bit different. But that's okay, we can do that. So those of you who are at the beginning or in the first semester, second semester, this is good news for you because you can start planning right away. Those of you who are near the end, you've got to plan very fast. Okay? So it's a matter of timing. We can talk about that. Okay. So, last question. I said last question, but that's a few, because there's one more last question. There'll be lots of last questions, actually. One more question. I'm the lecturer, I can make it up. Yeah. Who worked professionally before they started their degree here? Who had a job, a full-time, reasonably salaried job? Can you put up your hand? Okay, let me ask. Who didn't have a job before? Okay, so were you students? You were a student before? Yeah, student. Who else was over here, student? Okay. So many of you have had professional experience, which is really going to change the way you approach your PhD and what you've got in mind, because you may be going back to your previous job, like you, or you might be looking for a new job. So these are important questions to have in mind. Okay. Now, given those of you who are thinking of being an academic or a lecturer, let me just take you through a few things that you've got in your handouts. Yes, I'm sorry, it's very crowded, isn't it? Can you find a space? That might. Well done. Excellent. what I've done here is I've just gone and looked at some international descriptions of job advertisements for if the people who, if you're right at that, there's a space actually right down there that might be better for you. See down next to the camera, it might be easier. Yeah, keep going round that way. That's what it is. Otherwise you're not going to be able to see a thing. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, good. We'll reorganise the room in a moment. Yesterday I had 3 people who came to this workshop. So we sat at this table and we just did it together, so it was very easy. Yeah. Now, these are the sorts of things that are asked for in someone starting as an academic position. Okay? A PhD. Okay? So if you want to be a lecturer, a PhD. And in the discipline that you're applying for. That makes sense. A research record of published works. So some publications. And because you're at UPM, those of you who get a PhD will have already had 2 publications. But given everyone who graduates with a PhD from UPM is going to have 2, to make you competitive, you might like to think of something more than 2 or something a bit different. Okay? Knowledge of research methods, that would make sense. And excellent. Note the word excellent, not just written okay, not too bad, reasonably good. Excellent written and oral communication skills. This is what I'm going to have to focus on in a moment. And finally, listen to this one. Ability to work as part of a small collaborative team. Which is not too bad if you're in engineering, because engineers, who's in engineering? I think I'm right. Mostly you do work in teams anyway. You know, your work is in teams, and in some of the sciences, of course, you're working in teams. Who's in social science, like education, areas like that? Yeah. For those in social, we usually don't work in teams. We often just work on our own. So, experience about working in a small collaborative team is going to be important, because you need to be able to show how you can do that. Okay? This is for a mid-level position. This is not. This is a mid-level position. And I haven't given them special names because every country has different names. Like in Australia, we would call that lecturer. This one would be a senior lecturer, and this one would be associate professor. But they're all, in the United States, they're different names and so on. And so I thought just call it lower, middle, higher. Here we are, PhD, capacity to teach, for teaching. So here's a good question. If you're looking for a job like that, have you had any experience in teaching during your PhD? We're going to talk about that in a moment. Excellent, well, ability to supervise, excellent communication skills, communicate with different types of groups, so not just be able to talk to students, be able to talk to staff, senior staff, junior staff, all kinds of students, international students, local students, the whole range. That's one of the skills they're looking for. And promote and develop strong collaborative relationships, nationally and internationally. So we often think we do our research in our own little room, we write lots of stuff, it's all really good. What the university is looking for people who can network, who know lots of other people, who can collaborate with them across, outside Malaysia, outside your own home country, wherever that might be. Okay. And here are the more senior positions. This is what they're looking for, just so that you know. Undertake research and have an active research agenda. So it's okay to do research that your supervisor has told you, but how do you plan your own research agenda? What you're going to do for the next 5 years? How do you set up the big projects? The big thinking. Teaching at all levels, undergraduate and postgraduate. Supervising. A record of seeking external funding. That's a tricky one. Communicate effectively. Promote deep and strong collaborations again, and foster an inclusive and respectful research environment. They're the sorts of things that universities are looking for. So I don't know if you knew all of that, but maybe if you did, then hopefully you've been having some practice at trying to do that during your PhD. So, In your groups, and we'll have to reorganise the room a little bit again to get you to do this, what I would like you to do is first of all just have a look at, excuse me, thank you. Bad luck being sitting in the front, isn't it? You'll not do that again. That's very brave of you. Thank you. This sheet here, which has those, I want you to just, in your group, talk about whether they seem correct to you, whether that's the sort of thing you're expecting, whether that's the sort of thing you see with your lecturers here, whether that's the sort of thing you know in your home country. How does that work? And we'll spend about 5 minutes on that, maybe 10, and then when we're going to come back, we're going to turn over and do this page, but I want to introduce this page before we do this page on the back, which talks about general schools. Just for now, talk about these. For those, most of you are planning some sort of academic career, so I just would like you to spend a little bit of time in your group discussing that. Okay, so where there's groups, please work. Is anyone brave enough to come and sit here? Well done. I thought you might.
Private institutions, the expectation is very high.
They should have the more of online, you can say, active and passive. Active, there are certain technologies like physical development.
Now, one point that was made here very importantly about the lecturer position, and that is you don't just teach and you don't just do research, you also have administration and service. So usually across all systems that I know of, in Malaysia, in the United States, it doesn't matter where, you have at least 3 main things that you have to do as a lecturer. You teach, do research, and do service. Service. Or some people, in some places, thank you very much. That's administration. You give service to your department because you're on a special committee. You give service to the university. You give service to the community. So in your case, for example, if you're a lecturer, but you might also advise a community group on how to best do whatever it's doing. Or if you are a scientist, you might advise a community group on how to look after their space so it's more environmentally sound. You do that free. You do that because you have that knowledge and you are being of service to the community. So you're either service to the community or to the university or to the profession. Some people, their service is that they are on committees like the Malaysian Association of, I don't know, accountants. I don't know, I'm making that one up. And you're an accountant, you're a lecturer in accounting at UPM, you might be on that committee, helping that committee think through what they're going to be doing because you have really good knowledge of accounting or doesn't matter, education or something. So just to keep that in mind as well. Now, that was the academic positions, and not everyone wants to do academic, but just to let you know if you're thinking about that's the sort of thing you're going to be looking at. Now, were there comments that you thought that for your country or for your discipline that wasn't correct, that there's something a bit different from your country that you wanted to share with us? Anyone? No, you all agree with that? Anyway, but here's the important part. If you're preparing for a future after your PhD, and some of you are, as I found out early in your PhD, so I will have to conclude you in this definitely. Here are the other skills. Now, before we do that, I want to go to this slide. This is scary. Well, I think it's scary. I think it's scary. Why is it scary? There was some research done in 1998, and the research still holds true. Okay, it's interesting. Where a woman, a researcher in the United Kingdom called Pat Cryer, she was doing something like this with students, PhD and master students in the United Kingdom. And the whole thing was they were very near the end of their PhD. They were going to be submitting in the next few months. So, you know, by the end of this year, they will have graduated and be looking for jobs and all sorts of things. And they'd all come to a workshop on how to prepare their resume and how to prepare themselves for these new, wonderful, fantastic jobs they're all hoping to get. Okay? That's the scene. She said to them, so, let's talk about what knowledge and skills you've developed during your PhD that would be really attractive to an employer. So, group, tell me, see? The group went, well, I do know a little bit about how butterflies' left hind wing works because that's what my PhD was about. So there's not many employers who are going to be madly excited about that, you know. And I did work, I know my research looked at, you know, how if you add a bit of extra weight onto a bridge, it will cause it to have a slight tilt, and that might be more interesting to an employer. But that's all they could think about, their project. And she said, no, there's other things. What else did you learn? And they're going, I don't know. You know. And she said, what about skills? Did you get any skills? I could do research. So she was getting frustrated. So what she did was she worked with the students to try and get them to think differently about their PhD or their masters and what it gives them. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So there are a whole lot of other skills, and then on the back of this sheet, this one here. This is a collection of the sorts of skills that most employers are looking for. Okay? Now, these aren't necessarily how to do research or anything about the hind leg of a butterfly or anything like that. These are personal skills. Okay. The second problem that Pat Cryer found when she did her work was that even though students said, oh, well, I learned to network. And she said, so how would you show that to an employer? There we go. I'm not sure. So this is the second point that we're going to spend most of the rest of this session on, about what skills you already have developed, which ones you need to develop, and more importantly, how you can have some evidence of that. Okay? You can't just go for a job and say, oh, I'm fantastic. You might be fantastic. I'm sure you are fabulous. I'm sure you're fantastic too. And I'm sure you are fabulous as well. But an employer's not going to just believe that when you go, I'm fabulous. It's annoying, but they won't. They need some evidence or some examples. Okay? Now I'm going to pause there for one moment. I'm going to take a deep breath because I want to go back to one important issue before we go on. And that's not in the slides, it's nowhere, but it is very important. When you finish your PhD or your Masters, there's going to be one group of people that are much, much more important to you than employers. Anyone want to suggest who that is? He should just get a job. Family and friends. Now, PhDs can be really bad for families. Really bad. Okay? They can pose a lot of stress. We spend so much time just doing this PhD. And our friends, we haven't got time to meet our friends, we're too busy, we've got to write our chapter for our supervisor by tomorrow morning. I can't go out and have fun. No, I can't see my friends. To be perfectly honest, at the end of it, your family and friends are going to be the most important. So no matter what I say about skills and learning and development, keep that in mind. That's my main point. Second one, and this is a little story I'll tell you. There was a young woman, very attractive young woman, who was giving a talk to a group of new PhD students. And she said, I have one lesson to tell you. from my experience. So they all went, oh, yeah, she's going to tell us how to get our PhDs. This is fantastic. And she said, I walked into my supervisor on day one and he was a big man, but let's be honest, he was fat. He was really fat. And he said, okay, you've got one decision to make right now. One decision. Do you want to end up your PhD looking like me, or do you want to end up looking like you are now? Because she was very slim and trim. He said, I used to be slim and healthy too. He said, when I started my PhD, I just focused on my PhD. I didn't do any exercise. I ate rubbish, Hungry Jack's, McDonald's, you know, I ate all that because I didn't have time to cook and I didn't have time to do exercise, and look at me now. So she made the decision right then and there that she was also going to look after her health. So her family and her health. So she organised a little group of other female students in the department, and every 3 days a week they would go for a jog at lunchtime. Just chit-chat, now what up while they're going, and chit-chat about this and that and whatever it was. And she had finished her PhD and still looked fabulous and was healthy. So there's two messages that have got nothing to do with this, but if you hear two things from today, maybe they're important ones for you. Family and friends and your health. Because your health's not worth letting go, neither getting unfit and unhealthy. Okay, that's the end of that little talk. Any comments? Anyone want to add anything? No? Okay, right. So, what I would like you to do next in your groups is, excuse me again, with this sheet, the one about skills, just talk, have a read through them first quickly, and then have a talk about how you might be developing some of them, how you could develop some of them. Networking is at the top for a very important reason. It's considered to be one of the most important. Now, I have to say, being in Malaysia, I think you are amazing. Those of you who are Malaysian, you're amazing networkers. That's something that's not a big problem in Malaysia, from my experience. And I think many international students are also very good networkers. They have to be to survive. But chatting through that, and then we're coming to a plan after that. But just have maybe 5 minutes about these. Which ones do you think are silly? Which ones do you think are fantastic? Which ones can you already do? Which ones is your PhD or Master's allowing you to do or encouraging you to do? Okay, over to you. Just a 5-minute discussion. Okay. And I should have put health and fitness on there, so talk about that as well. Do you go jogging every day?
Analysis problem comes under problem solving, or
now, I'm going to invite you to start thinking hard soon. You've just been chatting up to now, you have to think very hard. There's two things that you need to start thinking about. Whether you want an academic lecturer position or any position, thinking about what sorts of knowledge and skills you will want for your future. It might be that you're going back to your old job, but how are you going to be different? What are you going to take back to that old job? You might be looking for a new job. What can you present? You might be not doing a job at all. You might decide you want to do voluntary work, but what can you contribute? Now, the biggest problem is when you go for something, whether it's some sort of position or you're preparing something, you need to give examples or evidence. See, it's a very nice research word. We talk about evidence all the time. Examples is another word you could use. So when an employer says, so tell me, have you had any experience with leadership? And you say, oh yes. The employee's sitting there waiting for an example. Oh yes, in my department at UPN, I organised a student forum where we all got together to share our research because we didn't have one in our department. Oh, what did that involve? Well, I talked to all the students and we arranged a date and I booked a room and we worked out a calendar of events, and I did that as just because I thought it was important to do. Fantastic leadership. It's not that you're the Prime Minister of Malaysia that gives you leadership. It does, but we're not looking to be Prime Minister next week. Maybe in 10, 15 years' time we might, but not today. What we're looking for is to show small leadership. What about time management? Did you do a course? No, I didn't do a course. How good are you at managing your time and on prioritising? Oh, I'm terrific. Example? Well, I'm a young mother. I have 3 young children and I finished my PhD and I finished it in 3 years. That's pretty good time management, I would have thought. Yes, I can see most of the women nodding. There's probably a similar one for men, but anyway. But there's all sorts of time management that you might have had to have thought about, that you've developed skills in time management that you didn't have before. What about project management? Slightly different. Yes. Are you any good at project management? I'm terrific at it. Example. When I did my PhD, I worked out the whole plan. For 3 years, I developed a set of milestones. I printed up on my wall so I would always meet them. I also shared that with my supervisor so that I kept to my time, and that's why I finished on time. Or I would have finished on time had my supervisor got my work back to me, but he didn't, so I wasn't. But that wasn't my fault because I stood it. Or I planned the fact that my supervisor was going away, so I planned that into my time. What about communication skills? Okay? Yeah, I'm fantastic at it. Example? I presented an international conference. I went and I met some of the key people in my field. Or I presented at the 3-minute thesis. Now, fantastic. Who's attended 3-minute thesis? Who's done 3-minute thesis? What? Oh dear. That's the worst thing I've heard all this week. Who knows about 3-minute thesis? No? But you haven't been? There's a practice tonight at 5 o'clock if you down in the Faculty of Modern Languages. There's 2 young women and 1 man who have been selected from last year's winners. They're representing UPN at the national final next week, the 27th of May, held at UTN. UTN is doing the national final, so every university in Malaysia is sending some finalists. We have 3 people, 2 from sciences, 1 from social science, 1 from engineering, 1 from science, and 1 from social science, and they're presenting their thesis. So they have 3 minutes to not just present it, but present it to someone like me who hasn't got a clue about the science stuff. They use science words that go, I don't know. But she explained it in a way that I thought, that's just so sensible. I understand every word she's talking about. And she did it in 3 minutes, and she made me very excited. So if you are not in the 3-minute thesis competition, can I strongly, strongly urge you, this is the 3rd thing, so family and friends, health, and now 3-minute thesis. Can we please, again, okay, thank you. So, this 3-minute thesis, but you don't have to have 3-minute thesis. Here's a check, here's something to do. This is what we did yesterday with the group. I timed them for 1 minute. 1 minute on my phone, and I said, tell the rest of the group in an interesting way that we can understand about what your research is about. Okay? The first one went for about 3 minutes. I said, it was 1 minute. The second one did it really fast. He's like, we didn't quite understand what he said. But when we did, he used lots of jargon. he was talking about the TMP and the LG Bay and the XYZ and what? So he did it a second time in words that we could understand. It was so interesting. Why don't we have a practice now? Yes. Now I'll give you some time to think. We'll do a practice before the end of the day. Alright? We just have 1 minute. But you can practice this when you're getting dressed in the morning. My thesis in 1 minute. Blah blah blah. My research. This. So you start off what the problem is. Why something has to be researched. How you went about it. What you found, and the most important part, why it's important. Communicating your research. Communicating especially to people who aren't in your field. It's all very well to go and talk to other scientists and talk about the LBG and the TPY and the X and the equals and the formula set. Or talking to fellow engineers and going, you know, well, we know what blah 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 and blah blah blah. Yeah. But what about if you're talking to an ordinary human being, like me? How do I know about your research if you can't speak it in simple words? So we'll practice that. That wasn't part of the plan, but we'll do that. So, here is part of the plan though. This one. So, I think this might be best if you try and do this in pairs, because the whole group is a bit too big. So someone next to you, or if you want to go and move and find someone. And here's what you're going to do. Because, oh actually, let me just see if there's... Let's, first of all, discuss, and I said group, your group, but the groups are a bit large and a bit difficult. So I think in pairs. First of all, what's your main aim? So you did discuss that, those of you here at the beginning, we talked about what your aim was for doing a PhD or a Master's. But you might have a couple of aims. Some of you did. I saw someone put her hand up 3 times. So she's got 3 aims, I guess is. So what your aims are, and then write them down. And I'm asking you to be really specific here because that's the purpose of today, to get really specific. It's a bit like saying, yes, I am going to go jogging 3 times a week. And then, what skills or knowledge do you need extra? Not just what you've got, but what do you need to work on? So let's just say you want a job as a lecturer. You need teaching. Okay, here's a problem. You might not be able to do teaching here. You might not be able to be employed because you're an international student, or your supervisor doesn't have any teaching you can do. Oh no, that means I can't put down teaching. Well, yes it does. Think back. Maybe in your group, you're the person who knows how to use a piece of software. Everyone else in your group is hopeless like me. I mean, I really wanted someone to come and help me today on something on my computer. Someone to teach me how to do it. What we did was the secretary phoned up a friend of hers who on the phone told her, then she told me what to do. So that person taught me how to do something. Think of all those other ways you could think about teaching. Maybe you teach outside university. Maybe you work with small groups of children. Maybe you teach people how to do blah, 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 without necessarily being called a teacher. Okay? So, the second thing you'll do is you're going to write down which specific things, just 3 or 4 really important things for you to think about between now and when you finish your PhD. And then we'll come back. We'll do the rest of this page and then we'll do the second page in a minute. And then the next one, see the smiley faces and the frowning faces? Okay. Which ones you think you know, and then you can tick off the ones that you know, or you think, I'm terrific at that, I'm really good at teaching, I'm really good at networking. Tick them off. The ones that are left, what are you going to do about them? What can you do? And then we'll worry about the second side when we've done that.
Because when I finish, I should go back to my work.
One of my friend, he's doing his postdoc in Japan. He's getting. He needs for 2 years. 2 years.
Now, one of the things that I'm going to suggest to you, two things I'm going to suggest. One is we're going to finish a bit early. Two things to suggest, I can count. Four things, I'll think of 4 things. What I'm going to suggest to you now might sound a bit silly, but I think it's got a lot of value, and it certainly has a lot of value from other places. And I'm just going to get this out. Who has heard of a portfolio? Yeah, portfolio. Yep. It's a collection of, usually of some sort of evidence. Right? Now here's what I'm suggesting, because quite a few of you are early in your PhD or your Masters, you're going to be doing lots and lots of things between now and when you finish. And here I am about 100% certain, that means I'm very certain, 100%, that by the time you finish, you will have forgotten a lot of the things you've already done. Yep? Okay, thank you. He agrees. One person agrees with me. But actually the truth is that you probably all agree with me, because you get to the end and you think, I didn't do anything on communication. Oh yes you did, you just forgot that you did it. So what I'm suggesting is you set up a portfolio. Just get a folder, get a nice one, you know, just spend a bit of money on a nice folder, put some plastic sleeves in it if you want to, that can work quite well. I've got plastic sleeves in this one. It's very messy at the moment, but anyway. And then as you go somewhere, do something, collect something, put it in there. So that when you are coming to the end and you're looking to apply for a job, and I was talking to someone yesterday, he's desperate for work, well not desperate, he's very keen to get a job here, so he's trying everywhere and he's submitting his information. But this would give him some evidence. He doesn't have to take that when he goes for the interview, he could, but it's for him. He could divide it into sections too. He could divide it into sections about research and about personal skills. So for example, he goes to an international conference. He might just want to write down a few things from that conference that will help him. For those of you who are very technological, and my guess is that's most of you in this room, there are e-portfolios online that you can go and use. You can put up materials on that. But for me, just plain old-fashioned paper and pencil does quite nicely. If you come to a workshop and you get a certificate, put the certificate in there. If you get a letter from somebody who says, "Dear so-and-so, thank you so much for organising that session the other day," or "Dear so-and-so, that was fantastic, that talk that you gave, I really enjoyed it," take that and put that fantastic bit of evaluation. If you do some teaching, get some evaluations, get some feedback from students, put it in there. Because it's all very well saying, "I'm a fabulous teacher, I'm the best teacher in the world." And I says, "Where's the proof?" "Oh, I don't have any, I just think I am fantastic." Well, that doesn't really quite do it, you know, a little bit more evidence is important here. So you might have some feedback from students if you don't do a formal thing, like this one, this sort of thing. And by the way, we're revising this form to be a lot easier for you to use, to ask us some other questions as well. But some sort of form, if you don't have something like that, you could just ask students, or maybe students will write to you and say, "Oh, that was fantastic, I learned so much from your class." Oh, you copy that and put it in your portfolio. That's worth $1 million. Okay? And so that's the last part of the session today. What we're going to, the other bit of good news is because there's so many people in the room, we're definitely not going to stay till 4:30 because you're all going to die of the heat and being so scrunched up. So we'll be finishing early, I promise that today. But I do want us to spend just that last little bit of time on the back sheet of your form that I gave you. And just do this on your own. Just take a few minutes just to think about what you might try to do about planning for your future after your PhD or Masters. And it might be that after your Masters is to do a PhD. What do you need to get into a PhD? How can you use your Masters really effectively right now to help you with your PhD? Are there people you should be talking to? Are there potential supervisors? Just, what is important? So, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we're going to practice a 1-minute thesis. But let's do that first. So, just a minute. Just think about your plan for the next maybe 6 months, 12 months, depending. A little bit of time, and then we'll move on.
You got that for after you finish your PhD? 6 months because together, because you can take that home and finish it off over dinner or while you're talking to your partner and your kids and you're not filling it in at home because you're spending time with your family. I just was asked a question here, if you want a lecturer's position or an academic position in university, should you do a postdoc? Now, postdoctoral fellowship. It depends a little bit, somewhat dependent on the discipline. Certainly my experience with Australia, New Zealand, USA and UK. That's my main experience. So it may be different in Malaysia. I can't say that. But usually in science and areas like that, it's very important to do a postdoc. And the reason is that scientists say when you do your PhD, you learn to do research. Okay, that's fine. In fact, you become an independent researcher. But to be a good scientist, you usually have to have a lab or a research group or a research team. You have to manage that. You have to manage the funding, you have to manage having lab assistants, you have to manage having several students, you have to manage having another postdoc, you have to actually, there's a lot of management in setting up a good science group or laboratory. Whereas if you're in social sciences, often you just have one student, one student, one student, one student. You don't have a lab, you don't have that sort of concept. So the idea being that to actually learn to be able to run your own work, that's what you learn when you do a postdoc. You don't so much learn to do research, you've already learned that. You learn how to manage that. And that's why a lot of people talk about, you find postdocs are much more common in science and engineering than they are in social sciences. Not to say you don't do them in social science and maths, they're just more common. Okay. Were there any other questions that you had? Does that answer your question? Any other questions people have?
You need a teaching certificate.
There's a very good point. If you were in many countries that I know, a teaching certificate would be very, very helpful. But if you don't have a teaching certificate, you could get some sort of, maybe there are some courses that you can do here on how to even communicate your research effectively to others. Part of teaching is being able to communicate. There's a really basic rule. Who's from education here? Anyone?
Okay, you will know this rule. And the rule is, and you all know this from experience, if you have to try and teach someone or explain to someone something new and you don't understand it yourself, you're going to be hopeless. So imagine me trying to teach you how to do something in technology. I'm really bad at it. I would be going, well, I think you do this, but I'm not really sure. But when you hear someone who knows their stuff really well, they teach it so easily, don't they? It just makes so much sense. So often, the whole idea of teaching is it helps you clarify your own thinking. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be formal teaching, but if you've got experience with teaching and some evidence of that, a teaching certificate would be very helpful, but that might not always be possible. Some universities, certainly in the United States and so on, when you do teaching assistants, or in Europe, you have part of your PhD is always to be teaching. So you just automatically you have all of that. Other questions? Yes.
Actually, the first time we said that to be a lecturer in the European countries or US is quite difficult for us to adapt. But as being a researcher, like a postdoc or maybe a research fellow, is there any chance of us and maybe like Asian people who involved in the working area of research?
It's a very good question. The US is not quite gone as far as Europe in terms of finding people with a PhD attractive in industry or in some sort of other organisation. When I say industry, I use the inverted commas to mean all sorts of things that aren't universities. Okay, so when I say industry, I don't necessarily mean big factories and so on. But that is becoming, people are becoming more and more aware of the skills and knowledge that someone with a PhD can bring. But here's the really big problem, and it makes my point even more strongly that I raised before: evidence. So you walk in for a job interview to someone who wants you to be able to just get on with the work and do it, you know, and you start to go, oh, well, of course my philosophy is so-and-so, and then my theoretical framework would be, You take half an hour to get round to describing just what you did. They want like this. They want to be clear. So being able to explain exactly what you did, why you did it in really clear language is absolutely critical. And that's where a lot of those skills, the ones on the back of the sheet, the one top with networking, they came from non-university job advertisements. Networking, leadership, assertiveness, collaboration, teamwork, all those words. So that's the sort of thing to look for. Being able to teach is important in academic, but the rest is communication. How can you communicate with a whole lot of different people? Okay? Does that make sense? Anything else? You're just all putting off the inevitable, aren't you? Because you know I'm going to ask you to do it. We'll finish in about 5 minutes, so that means we're just going to do this in pairs. I want you to just take a moment just to think about your own research. It doesn't matter that whether you're the first day or the last day. What's the problem or issue or concern that you're looking at? It could be, well, it's going to be different for every person. So what is it? Why is it important? So there's lots of problems out there, but it doesn't really mean you have to do a PhD on them. In fact, there's some wonderful research that talks about the gap research. You know how you say you find a gap and your research is going to fill that gap? Someone said, often the gap is there for a very good reason. A, because it's so boring, it's not worth filling, is one reason. Or the second reason is it's impossible to fill in a PhD. It would take 10 years and a Nobel Prize to find the cure for cancer. You are not going to find the cure for cancer or solve world peace in your PhD. So, that's why the gaps sometimes are there. But anyway, you could contribute to world peace. So why is that important? Why is this a problem? What's important about it? What's the solution? Or, if you haven't got a solution yet, so those of you near the end will probably have a solution, those at the beginning, how are you going to find out about how are you going to find a solution? And then what's special or exciting about your research? So here's the trick. It's Idul Fitri, or it's Christmas, or it's some special time when your family is all together. And your grandmother, okay? Grandmother who loves you very, very much, she's there. And she says to her granddaughter, I understand you're doing your PhD, see? And you say, yes, Grandma, I am. And she says, what's it about? Because she's a loving grandma and she wants to ask you. The last thing she wants is a half an hour talk about your PhD. She would like it in less than 1 minute, and she would like it in words she can understand. Okay? So that's what you're imagining. Or you go to a party and someone says, oh, are you doing your PhD? And you say, yeah. And they say, what's it about? Next thing you're going on, they go, oh, I wish I'd never asked. Oh my God, he's still going. It's 25 minutes. Oh, he's still talking about his PhD. I want to know in 1 minute. And I want to know if I should be excited by it. Not half an hour over a party, because I would have left for sure by then. Okay, so that's the whole idea that you're aiming for. I'm going to give you a minute to think, and then you're going to work out a pair, and then one person's going to do theirs to the other, and then vice versa. So you've got a minute's thinking time. Ready and think.
Preparing myself.
Okay, that's your practice. You've had your thinking time.
Overcrowded and almost 300 people, right? Overcrowding the in orders.
Okay. That was a whole minute. Okay.
So I'm creating a crowd simulation.
Now, other person. Ready?
What's going to happen in that
and go.
I'm creating a simulation. Yes, you can easily explain and they'll understand.
What I think we should do is let number one have one more try. They were the first person. Do you think that would be fair? Number one, you have one more try. Maybe you'd like to swap partners. And number one, do it one more time because you were the very first. But you can do it to the same person, one more, and then I'm promising, then we're finishing. So, ready? Try one more time, number one, and go.
I'm going to simulate events and see beforehand what's going to happen in that event. That enable you calculations calculations go faster. I can get you you can say DNA sampling and all that. We are doing it much faster. That's the whole point. What you did in almost 1 week, we are doing it in 1 month.
They want a 10-minute thesis. Now, this sounds silly, and you're probably saying, oh, God, why is she getting us to do this? But seriously, there are so many times when if you can just describe to someone really clearly in 1 minute what your thesis is about, it's a very handy strategy to have. So practice it. The 3-minute thesis is a more formal thing, but and it's often you'll hear it called the elevator pitch. The elevator, like when you go up in the elevator in a shopping centre, you go up, and this is the way people only say it. So who can I choose? Yes, please, could you come out? Would you mind, please? Yes. Sorry, you don't have to do anything, just stand here. It's okay, just stand here. It's easy. So, I'm getting in the elevator, and as I get in, the Vice Chancellor of the University gets in with me.
Vice-Chancellor, see? And, yeah, whoa. Now, the elevator takes 1 minute to get to his office. It's a slow elevator. 1 minute to get to his office. And I get in, and he says to me, so you're a PhD student? I say, yes. He says, so what are you doing your PhD on? I've got some funding, and I'd be interested to know. And you think, funding, just what I need. You've got 1 minute to convince the Vice-Chancellor your project is so exciting that he should fund it. Okay, so you just imagine you're in the elevator, there's the Vice-Chancellor, what are you going to say? And you're not going to mess around with a whole lot of background, and we know the literature says, and Smith and Jones in their study went on, and Brown said something else. You say, we know it's a critical issue, that blah, blah, blah. And I have gone looking to the solution by doing blah, 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 and it's really important because blah, 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 blah. He goes, fantastic, here's your money. Okay. But if you ever hear the elevator pitch, if you see that, that's what that one means. You've got that like 1 minute or 30 seconds or however long just to get that across. So that's what you can practice at home. Go home and talk to the dog or the cat or something of that. These are in 1 minute. Okay, thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much. I'm sorry the seats were gone. Thank you to those of you who sat there. There were somewhat more than were expected. Putra Sarjana would like your evaluation form at this time, and you can just leave it out on the table. Thank you very much, and good luck with your future art PhD.